19th century Italian opera was composed quickly. Rossini wrote 34 operas in 13 years, more than 2 per year. With this rapid composition, some formulations were used in the setting text to music, and the Rossini method would take over all of 19th century Italian opera, starting from him through the bel canto operas of Donizetti and Bellini, all the way to late Verdi. It was called La Solita Forma, or the conventional form in Italian, the name taken from a criticism of the operas of Verdi by 19th century Italian musicologist Abramo Bassevi. My name is Dr. Dominique Royam, and I'm a music director, conductor, and music communicator, here to help you achieve a deeper connection to the music you love. Follow me on social media at Dominique Royam for more content. Let's talk about how Solita Forma works. 19th century Italian opera is split into 2 kinds of sections, kinetic sections and static sections. In kinetic sections, the audience and the characters on stage are learning new information from each other or from a third party. They are called kinetic because the plot of the opera is moving forward in some way. The static sections have no plot movement in them. Instead, we get to hear how the characters are feeling or reacting to the situation in front of them, singing by themselves or in groups. These kinetic and static sections are strung together to create a full scene. In a duet, the standard form of interaction in a 19th century Italian opera, there are 5 parts. The scene begins with a scena using recitative, a vocal declamation in speech rhythms, in versi sciolti or blank verse, or verse without a rhyme. This is not considered part of the meat of the scene and is usually labeled with the number 0. The duet can also be started with an instrumental introduction, depending on the plot. The first movement of the duet is the tempo d'attacco, where 2 characters exchange information about the subject in question. It is more formal and has more melody than the scena, and is usually in versi lyrici, or rhymed verse. This is the first kinetic scene, and both of the characters on stage interact with one another. The second part of the scene is called the Addio or Cantabile, depending on the composer's discretion. It is the first static section of the scene and usually has the characters singing about their reactions to the information they just learned in the tempo d'attacco. The characters sometimes sing the same melody, and sometimes they have different melodies. Also, sometimes they sing together, and sometimes they trade off singing alone. The next section is kinetic, the tempo di mezzo. This is where new information about the subject of the duet becomes available, sometimes through the entrance of a third character to the stage. If there is a third character introduced, they leave before the end of this section. This new information either intensifies or unravels the plot of the opera, depending on where the duet is located in the overall structure of the opera. This kinetic section usually tumbles straight into the last static section, the Cabaletta. During this Cabaletta, the characters usually sing together with the same melody, inferring a unity of emotion or thought about the subject of the duet. Some of these same sections are used in arias or scenes for one character, and in finales, which usually have several characters on stage. In the aria, the numbers are put together in this pattern: Scena, Addio or Cantabile, Tempo di Mezzo, and Cabaletta. It skips the tempo d'attacco because there is no other character on stage with which to have a conversation. All of the dynamic setup happens in the scena. Finales use a remarkably similar pattern. Scena, which could also have a chorus number, march, or something else for a large group, then sometimes a tempo d'attacco if needed after the scena, a static scene for many voices called a largo concertato, which is musically like a cantabile for multiple people, a tempo di mezzo, then a final stretta where all the characters sing together at the end. The finale and the aria follow the pattern of static and kinetic movements of the duet, just with more or fewer people. As you can tell from these sections, the partitions in this operatic form have to be set up in the libretto before the music is composed. The composer just magnifies the form that is already present in the verse. Verdi famously pushed back against La Solita Forma in his operas, epitomized by a letter to Cesare de Sanctis after the premieres of Il Trovatore and La Traviata. I should like nothing better than to find a good libretto and with it a good poet. We have such need of one. But I cannot hide from you that I read a great reluctance the libretti that are sent to me. It is impossible, or almost impossible, for another to sense what I want. I want subjects that are new, great, beautiful, varied, bold, and bold to the core, with new forms, yet at the same time appropriate for music. When someone tells me, I did it this way because that is how Romani, Camonaro, etc. did it, we no longer can understand each other. It is precisely because those great men did it so that I wish it done differently. While Verdi pushed back against the operatic conventions of the time, he did not break them. Most of his operas are composed in a matured, expanded version of La Solita Forma. Let's take a look at how La Solita Forma works in a scene. The second duet in Verdi's Rigoletto is between Gilda and the Duke. Rigoletto has just seen his daughter Gilda and warned her to stay away from everyone, even at church. Rigoletto departs, leaving Gilda and her maid Giovanna at Rigoletto's house. Unbeknownst to them, the Duke has followed Gilda and Giovanna from church and has paid off Giovanna so she will leave the Duke and Gilda alone for an assignation. Listed as number 5 in the score, the Scena and duet begins there. In the scene, Gilda and Giovanna talk a little bit about the Duke, the handsome man they saw at church. They trade statements about the Duke with only slight orchestral accompaniment, making it a functional recitative. Let's listen to it.
Giovanna, ho dei rimorsi, e perché mai? A qui che un giovine seguiva il tempio, perché c'è a dirgli, l'odiate dunque, cotesto giovin voi? No, no, che troppo è bello, e spera amore, e magnanimo sempre, e gran signore.
This short Scena ends when Gilda begins to sing more lyrically, with more orchestral accompaniment, indicating the beginning of the tempo d'attacco. The change is marked with a tempo shift and key change in the score. Gilda sings of how she hopes the handsome man in church is a poor student because she would love him even more. The Duke rushes in to finish her sentence, setting off the main plot point of the tempo d'attacco, the meeting of Gilda and the Duke. Gilda tries to turn away from the Duke, asking him to leave and looking for Giovanna, who has cleverly disappeared to allow the tryst to happen. The plot points that are hit upon in the tempo d'attacco are the meeting of the Duke and Gilda and the exchange of the fact that they love each other. Let's hear that section now.
Sì, caro accento, un puro schiù di micel di contento. Giovanna, è vero, a me piacciono di te rispondere, a te nessuno. Son io, con l'anima che ti rispondo, a due che amano santo tutto un mondo. S'angelo demone, che importa a te? Io t'amo. Uscite. Uscire adesso, ora che accendere un fuoco stesso. A inseparabile
Cantabile begins in the middle of a long section of text for the Duke. The melodic writing changes from a recitative-like style to a more melodic style at the junction of the tempo d'attacco and the cantabile. It is marked in the score by another key change, meter change, and tempo change. The Duke is reiterating his declaration of love for Gilda, and she is responding that it is everything she has always wanted to hear, effectively succumbing to the seduction. This cantabile is static because there's no new information relayed between Gilda and the Duke, and they're expounding on their previously held position set up in the tempo d'attacco. At the end of the cantabile, the Duke and Gilda sing at the same time, but are singing to different people. The Duke is singing to Gilda, and Gilda is singing to herself, relaying her inner thoughts about the Duke's seduction. At the very end of the movement, they sing a cadenza together, symbolizing their unification of their feelings towards one another. Let's hear that now.
E il sole dell'anima, la vita e amore, sua voce il palpito del nostro cuore, e fama e gloria, potenza e trono, umane e fragili, qui cose sono, una pura bene, sola divina, e amor che agli angeli più ne avvicina. Adunque amiamoci, donna celeste, ed invidia gli uomini, solo per te, d'invidia gli uomini, sarò per te.
The tempo di mezzo begins at another tempo shift in the score, this time after fermata. The Duke and Gilda go back to speech-like rhythms, recitative-like, talking between themselves. The intrusion that makes this movement the tempo di mezzo comes in two waves. The first is a dramatic trick that has the overarching plot poke into the duet. Count Ceperano and a courier named Borsa are seen on the street in front of Rigoletto's house, acknowledging that they have found it. This brief musical interlude doesn't derail the scene in the house's garden because the Duke and Gilda don't hear it. Gilda asks the Duke's name, and when the Duke gives her a false name, Giovanna runs out of the house and says she hears footsteps. This is the second wave of intrusion. The first one, with the Count and the courier, was for the audience, and the second one, Giovanna running in, is for the lovers. The intrusion is the impetus of action and has the Duke and Gilda saying their final vows of love to each other. Let's hear that.
Che m'ami, ripetimi. Come felice.
Il nome vostro ditemi, saperlo non mi lice.
Il loco è qui. Mi nomino. Gualtier maledè, studente sono e povero.
Rumor di passi fuori, se mio padre.
A cogliere potessi il traditore che ci disturba.
Fuggilo di qual passione, vorrei
Dimamerai tu
e voi.
l'intera vita, poi
The final movement of the scene, the Cabaletta, is set up dramatically by the music at the end of the tempo di mezzo. A giant crescendo rolls through the orchestra, and a 2D force of winds, brass, and strings play fortissimo chords before a giant pause. This sets up another key and tempo change in the score for the Cabaletta. In the Cabaletta, the Duke and Gilda trade off saying goodbye and then sing together. There's some spectacular singing from both the Duke and Gilda, culminating in high notes for both. The fast tempo of the movement gives dramatic impetus for what is supposed to be happening while they sing of their love for each other. Giovanna is ushering the Duke out of Rigoletto's house quickly. Let's listen to the end of the duet now.
addio, addio, speranza e d'anima.
Addio, addio, speranza e d'anima.
Sol tu sarai per me. Sol tu sarai per me. Addio, addio.
Addio, addio.
Addio, addio. Vivrai immutabile l'affetto mio per te, sì. Per te sì. Vivrai immutabile l'affetto mio per te. Vivrai immutabile l'affetto mio per te. Addio. 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 Speranza sola sarà con me. Addio. Addio. Addio.
The second duet in the first act of Rigoletto is a textbook example of Solita Forma, as we just saw. In the Scena, Gilda and Giovanna talk about the Duke. In the Kinetic tempo di tacco, the Duke and Gilda meet, with the Duke declaring his love for Gilda. This new information is what defines the section as kinetic. The Cantabile has the Duke seducing Gilda into declaring her love for him. The section is static because we learn no new information. Both the Duke and Gilda are reflecting on the information learned in the tempo di tacco. The tempo di mezzo has two intrusions, one for the audience and one for the characters. This new information is the reason the action is kinetic. That leads to the last section, the static Cabaletta. The lovers sing of their love as the Duke is ushered out of Rigoletto's house. La Solita Forma can be used in most bel canto operas to figure out the musical and dramatic form. Check out the operas of Bellini, Donizetti, and the rest of the operas by Verdi, and the operas of Rossini and his compatriots for more examples. Thank you for joining me in this video about the form of 19th century Italian opera. Like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more. What do you want to learn about next? Leave me a comment down below. You can also support the making of these videos on Patreon. These videos take over 20 hours of research to complete, so Patreon is a great way to show your support. The bibliography for this video can be found on my website, dominiqueroyam.com. Interested in seeing my process? I document it on social media, so follow me for more updates. My handles are listed below. Thanks again, and see you in my next video.